so get ready, because today we are going to dive deep into the world of Jeremiah.
Jeremiah.
Yeah, a prophet who, well, he wasn't afraid to deliver some seriously tough news. You've given us some excerpts from a Portuguese biblical commentary and 2 English articles that shed light on his life and his message.
Okay.
And so what we really want to get at today is what made Jeremiah's message resonate across, centuries.
Right.
And what it means for us today,
Yeah, it's fascinating to consider how Jeremiah, a figure from, ancient Judah, can still speak to us today.
Yeah.
His story isn't just a historical account, but it grapples with timeless questions about faith, courage, and the consequences of our choices.
Yeah.
Both individual and societal.
And speaking of choices,
Yeah.
our sources depict Jeremiah as this young man
Right.
from a priestly family who receives a rather daunting call to be a prophet to Judah. Can you imagine receiving a call like that?
I know. Talk about pressure.
Especially considering the light of Judah at that time.
Right.
It was a period of intense political and social upheaval. The kingdom was on the verge of collapse.
Yeah.
Not exactly the ideal time to deliver bad news.
Right.
Right.
No.
And our Portuguese source highlights how Jeremiah initially resisted this calling.
Right.
He even cited his youth and the challenging nature of the task as reasons why he felt inadequate.
Yeah.
It's a relatable struggle, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That feeling of being in over your head.
I think we've all felt that way at some point
Totally.
in our life. Yeah. But what's intriguing is that despite his reservations, Jeremiah ultimately embraces his calling.
Right.
What do you think motivated him to push past those feelings of inadequacy?
I think it points to a deep sense of conviction. He couldn't ignore what he believed to be God's message,
Right.
no matter how difficult or dangerous it might be to deliver.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, the message itself wasn't exactly uplifting. All of our sources agree that Judah, during Jeremiah's time, was in a state of serious moral and spiritual decline.
Right.
It wasn't just one thing.
Yeah.
It was a whole web of issues.
It was like a downward spiral,
Yeah.
fueled by a number of interconnected problems.
Yeah.
Our sources point to rampant idolatry as a major issue.
Okay.
People were turning away from God and worshiping false idols,
Right.
like the Queen of Heaven, Molech, and Baal.
It makes you think about what those idols represent, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Was it a yearning for security? For something tangible in uncertain times? Or was it something deeper, a void in their lives that they were trying to fill?
Perhaps a bit of both.
Yeah.
What's striking is that this tendency to embrace false idols,
Right.
to seek solace in things other than a connection with the divine,
Yeah.
it's something we still see today.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Think about it. Materialism, celebrity worship,
Right.
the constant need for validation on social media.
Yeah.
Are these not the false idols of our modern age?
It's certainly something to consider.
Totally.
But returning to Jeremiah's time,
Okay.
the moral decay went far beyond just idolatry.
Right.
He was also deeply critical of the social injustice
Yeah.
that was so pervasive in Judah.
Yes, and our sources don't hold back on detailing that injustice.
Right.
Jeremiah condemned those in power who exploited the poor and vulnerable, accepted bribes, and oppressed orphans and widows.
Right.
It's a scathing indictment of the societal rot that had set in.
Yeah.
But here's the question.
Okay.
How did he communicate these complex messages in a way that would cut through the noise and resonate with people?
Well, one of the things that made Jeremiah stand out from other prophets was his use of powerful imagery
Okay.
and symbolic actions.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't just about speaking the words.
Right.
It was about embodying the message in a way
Yeah.
that people couldn't ignore.
So it wasn't enough to say, hey, folks, things are bad.
Right.
He actually had to show them. Our sources describe some truly compelling examples of these symbolic actions.
Yeah. For instance, there's the incident where Jeremiah wears a yoke around his neck
Okay.
to symbolize the coming captivity of Judah under the Babylonians.
Wow.
Talk about a visual metaphor.
Yeah.
It's hard to miss.
Right. Can you imagine seeing this respected figure walking around with a yoke,
Yeah.
a symbol of oppression and servitude?
Right.
It would have been impossible to ignore.
Yeah.
It's like he was saying,
Yeah.
this is what's coming unless we change course.
Exactly.
And that's just one example.
Right.
There's also the story of Jeremiah bearing a linen belt to represent the decay of Judah's pride and strength. He later digs it up, revealing that it's rotted and useless.
Right.
It's a potent symbol of the consequences of turning away from what's right.
It is.
It's amazing how these simple actions could convey such complex ideas and evoke such powerful emotions.
Yeah.
It's almost like performance art, but with an incredibly serious message behind it.
Precisely.
And his actions weren't always subtle.
Right.
He even went so far as to smash a clay pot in front of the elders and priests, signifying the impending destruction of Jerusalem.
Right.
What I find fascinating is the sheer boldness of these actions. It makes you wonder what kind of person would risk everything to deliver such a message.
It speaks to the depth of his conviction
Yeah.
and his courage, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Especially when you consider the backlash he faced.
The sources all emphasize that Jeremiah wasn't just some detached messenger.
Right.
He deeply felt the weight of his prophecies and the people's resistance. He faced constant opposition from false prophets, political leaders, and even religious authorities who wanted to silence him.
It's clear that speaking truth to power
Yeah.
came at a great personal cost for Jeremiah.
The Portuguese commentary, in particular, delves into his personal struggles. He wasn't immune to the pain and suffering he was prophesying about.
No, not at all.
The sources describe his imprisonment, physical abuse, and the deep emotional turmoil he experienced.
Yeah, he was mocked, ridiculed,
Yeah.
and even accused of treason.
It raises a profound question. Why would someone subject themselves to such hardship?
It's a question that transcends time, isn't it?
Totally.
Why do some individuals choose to speak truth to power, even when it costs them dearly? What motivates them?
I think for Jeremiah, it was a combination of factors. There was an unwavering commitment to what he believed to be God's truth, a deep love for his people even when they rejected him, and perhaps a sense of responsibility that he couldn't simply stand by and watch them hurtle towards destruction.
It makes you think about the whistleblowers, activists, and everyday people who challenge the status quo in our own time. They often face similar backlash and personal risk.
What does that say about the courage it takes to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's unpopular or even dangerous?
It's a powerful reminder that standing for truth can be a lonely and difficult path, but it's also a necessary one. It takes a certain kind of strength and resilience to remain steadfast in your convictions when everyone around you is telling you you're wrong.
And what strikes me is that despite the darkness and the harsh judgments in Jeremiah's message, there's also this persistent glimmer of hope. It's not all doom and gloom.
You're absolutely right.
All of our sources point to the promise of restoration, the eventual return of the Jewish people from exile, and the establishment of a new covenant with God. And this new covenant isn't just about outward rituals, is it?
No, it's about a fundamental transformation,
Right.
a change in the very relationship between God and humanity.
Yeah.
It's less about external rules and more about an inward transformation. It's about God's law being written on the heart, as one of our sources describes it.
And that's a concept that has resonated through history.
Yes.
It raises some truly fascinating questions. What are the theological implications of a covenant written on the heart? How does this concept influence our understanding of grace and redemption? And perhaps most importantly, how has this idea been interpreted and applied in different religious traditions throughout history?
It's truly remarkable how that concept of a new covenant has shaped religious thought for centuries. But before we get too deep into that, let's circle back to the Babylonian connection. It plays a crucial role in Jeremiah's prophecies and offers a lens through which we can view not only ancient history, but our world today.
You're right. The Portuguese commentary especially dives into the details of how God used Babylon as an instrument of judgment against Judah
and other nations.
And it wasn't just about military might or political dominance. It was about a higher moral order at work in history.
It makes you think about the rise and fall of empires throughout history, doesn't it? It's a pattern we see repeating again and again. Is there a lesson to be learned from this? Are there echoes of this higher moral order in the world today?
It's a question that continues to spark debate and discussion even today.
Totally.
But
yeah.
Let's shift gears for a moment and consider another fascinating aspect of Jeremiah's prophetic style.
Okay.
We've talked about his symbolic actions, but the sources also highlight his use of vivid imagery and metaphors, often drawing inspiration from nature.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the English articles mentions a vision of a boiling pot representing the impending doom of Jerusalem.
Right.
It's such a visceral image, evoking a sense of uncontrollable chaos and destruction.
Yeah.
And it's not just about destruction.
Right.
There's also the image of a withered tree. Symbolizing the spiritual dryness and decay of Judah. It's such a powerful metaphor for a society that has lost its way.
Right.
Its roots no longer drawing nourishment from what truly matters.
But even amidst these stark images of judgment and despair, Jeremiah doesn't leave us completely without hope, does he?
No, he doesn't.
The sources also describe contrasting imagery.
Right.
Like a branch growing from a withered tree, signifying the possibility of new life and restoration.
Yeah, it's like a reminder that even in the most desolate of landscapes, the potential for renewal and growth still exists.
It's that tension between judgment and hope, between recognizing the harsh realities of the present and holding on to the possibility of a better future.
Yeah.
That I find so compelling in Jeremiah's message. But getting back to his symbolic actions, there's a particular example that really struck me. The incident where Jeremiah buys a linen belt and buries it.
Yes, that one always stands out.
Yeah.
It seems so simple at first.
Yeah.
Yet the symbolism is incredibly profound.
Exactly. A linen belt at first glance?
Right.
Seems like such an ordinary object.
Yeah.
What was Jeremiah trying to convey with this action?
Well, the sources explain that the belt represents Judah's pride and strength. And the act of burying it symbolizes the decay and ruin that awaits them if they continue down your current path.
So it's not just about the impending downfall. It's about the erosion of their very identity. The things they hold dear, the values that once defined them. It's a much deeper and more devastating kind of loss.
Precisely. And to make it even more powerful, God then instructs Jeremiah to go back and dig up the belt. By this point, it's rotted and useless.
Can you imagine being in the crowd watching this unfold? It would have been such a stark and unsettling visual reminder of their own vulnerability and the consequences of their choices.
Absolutely. It's like he's saying, look, this is what happens when we cling to pride and ignore the signs of decay all around us. It's a message that transcends the specific context of ancient Judah. And speaks to our own human tendency to become complacent, to cling to things that no longer serve us.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
But Jeremiah didn't stop there, did he?
No.
He went on to perform other equally dramatic actions.
Right.
What about that incident where he smashes a clay pot in front of the elders and priests?
That's another powerful one. The clay pot, of course, represents Jerusalem.
And
the act of smashing it symbolizes the destruction of the city. It's a direct and unambiguous visual representation of the consequences of their actions.
It's almost as if he's trying to shock them out of their complacency, to make them confront the reality of their situation.
And you know what's interesting is that even though these symbolic actions were so dramatic and attention-grabbing, they weren't intended to be purely theatrical. They were meant to cut through the noise, to pierce through people's defenses, and force them to confront the truth of their situation.
But let's be honest, not everyone was receptive to Jeremiah's message, were they? In fact, it seems like he was more often met with resistance than acceptance.
You're absolutely right, and it's understandable in a way. Who wants to hear that their city is about to be destroyed, that their way of life is doomed. It's human nature to resist uncomfortable truths, especially when they challenge our deeply held beliefs or threaten our sense of security.
It's much easier to shoot the messenger than to face the message itself.
Exactly.
But Jeremiah didn't shy away from the truth, no matter how unpopular or dangerous it made him. He didn't sugarcoat things or try to appease those in power. He spoke truth to power even when it landed him in prison.
Speaking of prison, the Portuguese source mentions a particularly harrowing detail. That he was thrown into a cistern. essentially a pit filled with mud.
Wow.
It's a visceral image. It speaks to the brutality and desperation of his opponents.
Right.
They were determined to silence him.
Yeah.
To bury his message along with him in that muddy pit.
It makes you wonder what was going through his mind during that time. What sustained him in those moments of isolation and despair?
Yeah.
Was it his faith?
Right.
His unwavering belief in the truth of his message? Or was it something else entirely?
Right.
Something we can only speculate about.
It's a fascinating question, and one that the sources don't fully answer.
Right.
But what we do know is that Jeremiah's spirit was unbroken. He emerged from that cistern, and his message continued to ring out a testament to the enduring power of truth and the resilience of the human spirit.
His story reminds us that even when we feel silenced, marginalized, or forgotten, our voices still matter.
Yeah.
There's a power in speaking truth, even when it seems like no one is listening.
And that brings us to a crucial question.
Okay.
What does Jeremiah's message mean for us today?
Right.
How do his words and actions resonate in our modern world? Are there parallels between the challenges he faced and the ones we encounter in our own lives?
It's fascinating to consider how a prophet from ancient Judah can still speak to us across the centuries.
Right.
What strikes me is that the sins Jeremiah condemned, idolatry, social injustice, disobedience to God's law, these are all issues that we continue to grapple with today.
It's almost uncanny how relevant his message remains. One of the English articles makes a brilliant connection between the worship of false gods in Jeremiah's time and the things we idolize today.
Yes. It points out that while we may not bow down to statues of Baal anymore, we often allow other things to take precedence in our lives. Money, power, fame, status, the constant need for approval and validation. Aren't these the modern day idols that distract us from what truly matters?
It's a powerful analogy. And it makes you question what sacrifices we're making at the altar of these modern day idols. What are we neglecting? What values are we compromising? And what is the ultimate cost of this misplaced devotion?
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
And then there's the issue of social injustice, which sadly seems as prevalent today as it was in Jeremiah's time. The sources highlight how he condemned the exploitation of the poor, the oppression of widows and orphans, the acceptance of bribes, issues that continue to plague societies around the world.
It's a stark reminder that despite all our advancements, we still haven't fully learned the lessons of the past. We're still struggling to create a world where justice and compassion prevail.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
But let's not forget that Jeremiah's message wasn't solely focused on judgment and condemnation. It also contained a powerful message of hope. Embodied in the concept of the new covenant.
Absolutely. This idea of a transformed relationship between God and humanity. A covenant written on the heart rather than on stone tablets. It's a message that continues to resonate deeply, offering a vision of a future where love, forgiveness, and compassion triumph over fear, division, and hatred.
It's incredible how this idea of a new covenant, a transformation of the heart, has resonated across cultures and time periods. It suggests a path forward, a way to bridge divides and heal the wounds of the past. But I'm curious, did Jeremiah believe this transformation was possible in his own lifetime?
That's a great question.
Did he envision a future where Judah would fully embrace this new covenant?
And one that the sources offer some intriguing insights on. While Jeremiah certainly held on to the hope of restoration and renewal, his prophecies also acknowledged the deep-seated resistance to change within Judah. It wasn't going to be an easy or immediate transformation.
So it was a long game. A vision that extended beyond the immediate crisis. It makes you think about the role of prophets in general, doesn't it?
It does.
Are they simply messengers of doom? Or are they also beacons of hope, pointing towards a future that might not be fully realized in their own time?
It's a complex role, to say the least.
And
I think in Jeremiah's case, it was a delicate balance between delivering these harsh pronouncements of judgment and offering glimpses of a brighter future. It's like he's saying, yes, things are bad, but they don't have to stay that way. There's still a possibility for change, for redemption, for a new beginning.
But that possibility hinged on a fundamental shift in their hearts and minds.
Right.
A willingness to confront their own shortcomings and turn back towards what truly matters.
Yeah.
It's a challenge that echoes through history, isn't it?
It is.
How do we as individuals and as societies move beyond ingrained patterns of behavior, break free from the cycles of injustice, and embrace a more compassionate way of being?
It's the ultimate question, isn't it?
It is.
And one that Jeremiah grappled with throughout his prophetic ministry.
But here's something else to consider.
Okay.
His message wasn't limited to just Judah.
Right.
One of the fascinating details in the Portuguese source is that Jeremiah was also sent to address the surrounding nations.
He was.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
The text mentions him traveling to places like Egypt, Philistia, Edom, Moab, Ammon, even Babylon itself.
It's almost as if he's on a prophetic world tour.
Right.
Spreading a message that transcends national boundaries and cultural differences.
Can you imagine the reactions he must have elicited from these foreign leaders?
I know.
Here's this prophet from a relatively small and insignificant kingdom showing up on their doorstep and telling them how to run their affairs.
It takes a certain level of audacity to deliver that kind of message.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with powerful rulers accustomed to having their own way.
It makes you wonder if any of them actually listened to him. Or if they just dismissed him as a meddling outsider.
Well, the sources don't give us much detail about how his message was received by these foreign nations.
Yeah.
But it's safe to say that not everyone welcomed him with open arms.
Let's be honest. Prophets aren't exactly known for their diplomatic skills.
Right.
But what strikes me is that Jeremiah's willingness to cross borders and confront foreign powers speaks to the universality of his message. It wasn't just about the fate of Judah.
Right.
It was about the moral and spiritual state of the entire world.
Exactly. He seemed to have this innate understanding that what happens in one corner of the world inevitably ripples out and affects the whole.
It's a perspective that feels incredibly relevant today. In our interconnected and globalized world.
Yes, we're constantly reminded that the choices we make, the actions we take, have far-reaching consequences.
But let's dive back into the specifics of Jeremiah's message for a moment.
Okay.
I'm curious about his use of language and imagery. It seems like he often drew inspiration from the natural world to convey his message.
Yes, that's a hallmark of his prophetic style. He uses these vivid and evocative images drawn from nature to communicate complex spiritual and moral concepts in a way that people could grasp and relate to.
For example, the English article we have mentions a vision of a boiling pot, symbolizing the impending doom of Jerusalem. It's such a powerful image, conveying a sense of uncontrollable chaos and destruction.
And the Portuguese source highlights the imagery of a lion roaring.
Okay.
Representing the ferocity and power of the Babylonian army.
Right.
It would soon descend upon Judah.
Wow.
It's like he's using these primal images to awaken something deep within their collective psyche.
Right.
To shake them out of their complacency.
And there's also that recurring motif of a withered tree representing the spiritual dryness and decay of Judah.
Yes. It's like he's saying they've lost their connection to the source of life.
Right.
That their roots have become detached from what truly nourishes them.
These images are so effective because they bypass our intellectual defenses and speak directly to our emotions, to our subconscious fears and anxieties. They make the message visceral, unforgettable.
But as we've discussed, Jeremiah's use of imagery wasn't limited to visions of destruction.
Right.
He also used it to convey hope, to point towards the possibility of renewal and transformation.
Right. The English source mentions the beautiful passage where he talks about a branch growing from a withered tree, symbolizing the promise of new life and restoration.
It's like a visual representation of that famous saying.
Right.
There's always hope, even in the darkest of times.
And the Portuguese commentary highlights the image of a flowing river, representing the abundance of God's blessings that would eventually flow back into their lives if they turned back towards him. It's such a contrast to the image of the withered tree.
It is.
Highlighting the transformative power of repentance and renewal. These images offer a glimpse of a better future. A future where justice and righteousness prevail, where hearts are transformed, and where a new covenant written on the very soul of humanity binds us together in love and compassion.
And that vision of a better future, a future that Jeremiah himself may not have lived to see, is ultimately what sustains us, what gives us the strength to keep striving, keep hoping, keep working towards a world that more fully reflects the values of justice, compassion, and love.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of the prophet Jeremiah, what can we take away from his powerful and often challenging message? What resonates with you most?
For me, it's the reminder that even amidst chaos and uncertainty, even in the face of overwhelming challenges, there's always a flicker of hope. That hope might be buried deep, obscured by the darkness of the present moment. But it's there, waiting to be unearthed, nurtured, and shared.
Beautifully put. Jeremiah's story reminds us that we all have a role to play in cultivating that hope. In speaking truth to power, in working towards a more just and compassionate world, and in never losing sight of the possibility of transformation, both within ourselves and within our communities.
And perhaps most importantly, his story teaches us that true strength lies, not in clinging to power or control, but in the willingness to surrender to something greater than ourselves, to embrace vulnerability, and to find the courage to speak truth, even when it's difficult, even when it's dangerous, and even when it seems like no one is listening.
Well, there you have it. A deep dive into the world of the prophet Jeremiah. A world of stark warnings, political intrigue, personal struggles, and ultimately a message of hope that continues to echo through the centuries.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going. Until next time.